And then, out of nowhere, my wife dropped a bombshell. I don't want a child with you. I want one from a light-haired man with blue eyes and perfect genetics. You're probably wondering how the hell that even happened. Well, let me take you through everything. What happened next, and how it all played out. Trust me, you'll want to hear this. Name's Henry. I'm 34. Average height, dark hair, brown eyes, just a regular guy. Nothing crazy. I mean, I'm not ugly, but I'm not exactly the cover model for Men's Health either. And you know what? I never thought it mattered. My wife, Ginger, used to agree. Or at least I thought she did. We've been married for about 5 years. Life was pretty solid. Career moving up, decent savings, a house, and lots of plans for the future. Ginger, though, she's one of those women who turns heads. She was a beauty with dark hair, big brown eyes, and a slim, tall, graceful figure. People notice her when she walks into a room. She never cared about that stuff much, though. Or at least I never saw any signs of it. Anyway, things started going sideways at a friend's birthday party. It was one of those laid-back get-togethers where the wine flows a little too freely, and the conversations start drifting into strange territory as the night goes on. People were lounging around on couches and chairs, just talking about everything under the sun. Dreams, goals, the future, and of course, kids. You know, all those deep, life-altering discussions that only seem to happen when the wine kicks in. We were in the middle of a conversation about the kind of kids we imagine having. How many, what they might be like, what we want to teach them. That's when Ginger dropped a bombshell. I'd want my kid to be from another man, she said, almost casually, as if she were talking about the weather or what kind of cheese to serve at the party. The room immediately fell silent. It was as if the world paused for a second. My brain couldn't even process what she had just said. Did I hear her right? Did she just say that? The people around us seemed just as stunned, not quite sure how to react. There was a moment of awkward tension, and I could feel the weight of it in the air. Before I could even gather my thoughts, Ginger, almost as if trying to brush off the shock she had just dropped on everyone, waved her hand dismissively and laughed nervously. "Oh, I didn't mean it like that," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. "I was just joking. Like, imagine if we had a kid with Scandinavian genes. You know, tall, blonde, blue eyes, something different. He'd probably grow up looking like a supermodel, right?" Ginger added, her voice light and casual. A few people chuckled awkwardly, trying to play it off as if it were just another quirky comment, but I could see the raised eyebrows. There was a shift in the room, subtle, but unmistakable. People were pretending to laugh, but underneath it, you could feel the tension building. Even I didn't know how to react at first. Was this really just a joke? Was she serious? For a moment, I felt the room close in on me. I could feel everyone's eyes flicker between me and Ginger, waiting for my response. It was like the conversation had just shifted into some strange new territory, and I was caught in the middle, unsure of where it would go next. So, like anyone trying to dodge an uncomfortable situation, I went the easy route and joked back. "Sure, and while we're at it, let's throw in some Viking strength too," I said, forcing a grin, trying to lighten the mood. It was the kind of response I'd go for to keep things from getting too real too fast. The group erupted into laughter, the kind of laugh that's just a little too loud, a little too forced. But somehow it worked. The tension lifted, and the conversation moved on, like we'd all decided to pretend it hadn't happened. But it stuck with me. It was one of those weird comments you brush off at first, thinking, hey, just a drunk slip-up. But later, lying in bed that night, it kept replaying in my head. Why the hell would she even say something like that? I didn't know it yet, but that was just the beginning. I thought it was a random offhand joke. Turns out, I was about to face the full storm of her twisted ideas. The next few days were off. Ginger kept bringing up weird comments about genetics and physical traits, little things that seemed harmless on the surface but kept adding up over time. At first, I thought maybe she was just making casual observations, the kind of things people notice when they're half watching TV. But it wasn't just one or two offhand remarks. It was becoming a pattern. We'd be sitting on the couch, watching a movie or a show, and out of nowhere, she'd comment, "Look at that actor's jawline. Do you think it's all genetics? Or does he work out 20 hours a week? It was an odd thing to bring up, but I didn't think too much of it at first. She was just making conversation? But then it happened again. We'd be watching something else and she'd say, "Wow, those eyes." Imagine having a kid with eyes like that. It wasn't a one-time thing. She'd say things like that often, almost as if she were mentally cataloging traits she thought would make the perfect child. At first, I didn't catch on to the deeper meaning, but the more it happened, the more it started to feel off. Like there was this undercurrent of focus on physical perfection, on the kind of child she wanted to have, rather than the life we were building together. And it wasn't just the actors or the celebrities she'd point out. Sometimes, it was even random people we'd pass by on the street. She'd quietly remark on their height, their hair, their posture, how it all looked so genetically ideal. Like, we were at the grocery store, and she whispered, "That guy's probably over 6 feet tall. I wonder if he's Scandinavian or something. They're always tall." I laughed awkwardly. "What's with you and Scandinavians lately?" Ginger smirked but didn't really answer. I tried not to think much of it. It was as if the more she spoke, the more I realized how deeply she was preoccupied with creating the perfect child. It wasn't about love or family or the future anymore. It was about ideal traits and how those traits could be passed down. It started to feel like something bigger than just a passing interest in appearances. It felt like a signal that she wasn't seeing us, our future, as it was. She seemed more focused on some ideal version of a family that, in reality, we would never be able to control. People go through phases, right? Like how someone might get obsessed with fitness for a while or binge-watch documentaries on ancient aliens. But this was different. One evening, we were having dinner, and she casually mentioned that she'd been reading up on genetics. Apparently, she found some blog or TikTok influencer talking about optimal gene combinations and passing on superior traits. I almost choked on my pasta. Superior traits? Are you serious right now? I asked, giving her a skeptical look. She didn't even blink. Yeah, it's fascinating. There's research showing that people with certain features have better chances of success in life. You know, like taller men earning more money or people with symmetrical faces being perceived as more trustworthy. I stared at her. Okay, but why does that matter to us? I mean, I'm pretty sure we're fine without all that genetic superiority crap. She sighed like I was missing some deep philosophical truth. Henry, I just want the best for our future kids. Don't you? At that moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or argue. I settled for neither and changed the subject. But deep down, something didn't sit right. The way she talked about it, so matter-of-factly, it was starting to freak me out. A few weeks later, things escalated. Ginger became obsessed. She spent hours scrolling through social media, watching interviews with so-called genetic experts, and reading up on inheritance patterns. One night, she hit me with another bombshell while we were watching a movie. Out of nowhere, she suddenly said, "I've been thinking, maybe we should seriously consider how genetics will shape the future of our kids." I was taken aback. "Ginger, what the hell are you talking about?" I asked, setting the remote down and looking at her with confusion. She didn't seem to notice how strange her words sounded. She just shrugged and said, almost casually, "I'm just saying, we need to be strategic. If we want our kids to have every advantage in life, we should aim for the best genetic pool." For a moment, I just stared at her, trying to understand what she meant. It wasn't just a casual comment. It felt like a plan, like she had already mapped out the perfect formula for our future children. "What? You're talking about genetics now? You're acting like we're breeding racehorses or something," I said, trying to brush it off, but feeling a sinking feeling in my stomach. She didn't seem fazed by my comment. "It's not that extreme," she said, her tone surprisingly calm, as though this was all perfectly reasonable. "I'm just thinking that if we want our children to have the best start, physically, mentally, genetics play a big role. We should consider that when we're planning for the future." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was a conversation I never thought we'd have. "Ginger, this isn't about breeding a perfect child. It's about having a family, about love, and what we give our kids beyond their looks. Don't you see that?" But she just looked at me, unfazed. Like this whole discussion was something that made perfect sense to her. And in that moment, I realized how different our perspectives were. What she was talking about wasn't about creating a life together. It was about crafting some idealized version of a child. I started to feel like I wasn't even part of the equation anymore. Like my thoughts, my feelings, didn't matter in this new world she was imagining. She didn't even seem to care that I wanted my child, not a child from some other guy. What's gotten into you? She crossed her arms and gave me that, "You just don't get it" look. Henry, this isn't about you. It's about giving our kids the best start. People with strong genetics have a head start in life. I felt my stomach twist. Are you trying to say my genes aren't good enough? Her eyes widened in surprise, like she hadn't thought of how messed up that sounded. No, I mean, you're responsible and smart. It's not about you. But you know how competitive the world is. I'm just worried. Worried about what? I demanded. That our kids won't be tall enough to play pro basketball? That they won't be genetically engineered supermodels? Ginger didn't answer right away. She just looked at me like she was weighing her words carefully. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't something she was going to snap out of after a few blog posts and YouTube videos. She was dead serious. That night, I lay awake next to her, staring at the ceiling. I had no idea how to deal with this. How do you reason with someone who's convinced your future kids need to look like they just stepped off the runway in Milan? The next few weeks were hell. Ginger's obsession went from subtle to full-on crazy. Every conversation somehow circled back to genetics. I couldn't even enjoy a simple walk in the park without her commenting on random people. "Look at that family," she said one day, nodding toward a tall, blonde couple pushing a stroller. "Bet their kids will grow up to be athletes or CEOs. I rolled my eyes. Yeah, because I color totally determined success. She ignored my sarcasm, staring at them like she was analyzing a science experiment. It wasn't just the comments anymore. Ginger was colder, distant. She stopped showing affection like she used to. The woman who once used to cuddle with me during movie nights now acted like I was invisible half the time. And when she wasn't ignoring me, she was throwing passive-aggressive jabs. One night we were arguing about something trivial. What to order for dinner, I think, when she snapped. "Maybe if you weren't so average, you'd understand how important this is." I froze. "Excuse me? Average? Is that what you think of me now?" She bit her lip, realizing she'd gone too far. But it was already out there. "Henry, I didn't mean it like that. You know what I'm trying to say." "No, I really don't," I shot back, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you regret marrying someone who's not a 6-foot-tall Nordic god." She sighed and crossed her arms. I'm scared. Okay? Scared that our kids won't have the same opportunities other people's kids will. Life is hard enough as it is. That's bullshit, Ginger. Our kids will have love, support, and everything they need. But you're stuck on this delusional idea that genetics are a golden ticket to success. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She didn't say anything else that night, but I could tell she wasn't letting go of this fantasy. And me? I was stuck between wanting to shake some sense into her and just walking out the door. It only got worse from there. Ginger started pulling away emotionally, like she'd already written me off as genetically unfit. It was exhausting. I confronted her one evening. "Let me get this straight. You think I'm not good enough to be the father of your kids because I'm not tall and blonde? Why the hell did you even marry me, Ginger?" She hesitated, her face softening for a moment. "Henry, that's not what I'm saying. You're a good man. You're reliable, and I love you. But this isn't about us. It's about our future." "Wow. So I'm good enough to be your husband, but not good enough to father your children? Got it." I shook my head, anger bubbling inside me. "You're out of your mind." That night, I didn't bother sleeping next to her. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out where the hell everything went wrong. This wasn't the woman I married. The woman I married didn't care about superficial things like this. Now, it felt like I was living with a stranger. And then, for the first time, a thought crossed my mind, a thought I couldn't shake. What if all of this was somehow tied to her infidelity? What if this obsession with perfect genes wasn't just some passing idea, but part of something deeper, something that had been brewing all along? I couldn't bring myself to believe that Ginger could have been unfaithful. It didn't add up. She wasn't the type, or at least, I never thought she was. She always seemed present, always around. The idea that she could betray me, that she could be hiding something, felt impossible to accept. Ginger wasn't even hiding her obsession anymore. She kept talking about perfect genes, like it was a casual topic of conversation. One night, she took it to a whole new level. We were sitting in the living room, barely talking. I was flipping through channels, trying to avoid any deep conversations, when she suddenly spoke. "Henry, I've been thinking," she started, her tone way too calm for my liking. "Oh, great. Here we go again." I muted the TV and turned to her. "Thinking about what?" She hesitated for a moment, then dropped the bomb. "Maybe we should look into artificial insemination, from someone with ideal traits." I blinked, not sure I'd heard her right. "What the hell did you just say?" "Don't get upset," she said quickly, like she knew exactly how insane it sounded. "I'm just suggesting we explore all our options." I could feel the blood rushing to my face. I stood up, pacing around the room. "Options? You mean, have some random guy's DNA in our child instead of mine? Are you hearing yourself right now?" "Henry, calm down," she said, as if I was the one being irrational. "It's not like I'm saying I want to be with someone else. It's just a medical procedure." "Oh, well, that makes it so much better," I snapped, throwing up my hands. "Thanks for clarifying, Ginger. I feel so much more secure knowing you want to design a baby through artificial insemination instead of using my so-called inferior genes," I said sarcastically. She crossed her arms, frustration etched on her face. "You're twisting my words. You refuse to understand where I'm coming from." "No, I understand just fine," I said, glaring at her. "You've decided that I'm not good enough, that our future kids need to be genetically upgraded, because you can't stand the idea of them looking like me." She rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You've spent months obsessing over this bullshit, Ginger. You've compared me to tall, blonde strangers and thrown statistics in my face. If anyone's being dramatic, it's you." She stood up, too, meeting my gaze. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Henry. I just want to make sure our children have the best opportunities. Why can't you see that?" "Because you've lost your mind," I shouted. "You've let this fantasy take over your life, and you don't even realize how much damage you're doing. Do you even care how I feel?" Her face softened for a moment, but the damage was already done. I couldn't unhear what she'd said. That night, I couldn't stand being in the same house with her. I needed space. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing in the living room. I drove aimlessly for a while, my mind racing. This wasn't just some petty argument. This was a fundamental crack in our marriage, one I wasn't sure we could ever fix. When I got home a few hours later, Ginger was waiting for me. She looked exhausted, but her expression was unreadable. "Are you going to stay out all night from now on?" she asked quietly. "I'm thinking about it," I replied coldly. I walked past her without another word and went straight to the spare bedroom. I was done. Done with the conversations, the statistics, the cold looks. Done with feeling like I wasn't enough. The next few days were tense and silent. We barely spoke to each other. I could tell Ginger was confused, maybe even hurt, but I didn't care anymore. I was mentally checked out. Every time I saw her, all I could think about was that damn conversation. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep living like this. The decision was made, even if it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. It was only a matter of time before things exploded again. Ginger, of course, didn't seem to get just how far she'd pushed me. She thought this was just another bump in the road. But for me, this was the cliff. I'd already fallen, and there was no climbing back up. One night, after another stretch of cold silence, she tried to revisit the conversation. We were sitting at the dining table, both eating in near total silence, when she finally spoke. "I think we need to be practical about this, Henry," she said softly, almost like she was trying to avoid setting me off. I put my fork down and stared at her. "Practical about what, exactly?" She sighed and rubbed her temples like I was the difficult one. "About children. About how we move forward. I've been looking into other options." My stomach dropped. "What kind of options?" "Calm down," she said quickly. "I'm just talking hypothetically. I was reading about how some couples use surrogates, or they meet people who are willing to help in non-traditional ways. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Non-traditional ways? You mean finding some guy to? No. She cut me off, shaking her head. Of course not. I'm not suggesting I'd cheat or anything like that. But it's not uncommon for people to explore alternatives. You have to admit, it's something worth discussing. Ginger, are you seriously sitting here at this table telling me that we should meet someone to make a baby? What the actual hell is wrong with you? I couldn't even believe the words coming out of her mouth. She hesitated, probably realizing just how insane she sounded. Then she gave a nervous laugh and waved her hand, as if to erase what she just said. You're overreacting. It was just a thought. Oh, just a thought. I stood up, glaring down at her. You think I'm going to sit here and listen to you casually brainstorm ways to replace me as the father of our kids? Jesus, Ginger. I'm done. Henry, wait, she said, her eyes widening in shock. You don't mean that. I do, I said, my voice low but firm. I've been done for a while. You've driven me to my breaking point with this genetic fantasy bullshit. I don't even recognize you anymore. Henry, come on, she pleaded, standing up and moving toward me. You can't just walk away over a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, I snapped. You've been chipping away at me for months, making me feel like I'm not good enough, like I'm some defective placeholder for your dream man, and now you want to talk about alternatives? Screw that. I'm done being your experiment. Don't you think you're being selfish? She fired back, her tone sharp. You're making this all about your feelings instead of thinking about our future family. I laughed bitterly. Oh, I'm selfish? That's rich. Enjoy your perfect future, Ginger, but it won't be with me. That night I packed a bag and walked out the door. Ginger followed me to the front steps, her voice trembling with disbelief. Henry, wait. You don't have to do this. Let's talk. I'm done talking. I cut her off, not even turning around. All you care about is your fantasy of a perfect family. Well, newsflash, Ginger, there's no such thing. You've destroyed what we had chasing something that doesn't exist. I got in the car and drove off without another word. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't be there anymore. A few hours later she called. What do you want? I asked flatly. Where are you? She asked softly. Are you coming home? No, Ginger, I'm not coming home, I said with finality. I need space. I need time to think. And honestly, you should do the same. Henry, I don't understand why you're so angry. I thought we were having a rational conversation, she said, her voice full of confusion. Jesus Christ, Ginger, I groaned. You still don't get it, do you? You've been tearing me down for months, comparing me to some fantasy man in your head, making me feel like I'm not enough. How the hell can you not see how damaging that is? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she whispered, I didn't mean to hurt you. Well, you did, I replied, my voice like ice. Look, I'm done arguing. We're not on the same page anymore. Hell, we're not even in the same book. That was the last real conversation we had. The next day, I called a lawyer. Ginger was still in shock, I think. She didn't fight the divorce much, probably because she was too busy convincing herself that I was the one who lost my mind. But in reality, I was finally taking control of my life again. The divorce process moved fast. Too fast, maybe. Ginger barely put up a fight. She didn't even try to drag things out or complicate the division of assets. It was like she couldn't comprehend that it was really happening. Meanwhile, I was laser-focused. Meetings with my lawyer, getting my own bank account sorted, finding a new place to stay. She tried reaching out once or twice, but it was awkward and pointless. The last time she called, she said, Henry, I think you're overreacting. Maybe you're just stressed out from everything going on. We can figure this out together. I almost laughed at how delusional that sounded. Ginger, I'm not stressed, I told her. I'm done. We're too far gone. You've made it crystal clear that I'm not part of your plan anymore, and I can't be married to someone who thinks I'm just a genetic liability. She fell silent after that. No arguments, no apologies, just silence. Maybe she was finally realizing how deep this cut ran. The divorce was finalized quietly. Our friends and family started hearing bits and pieces, and the questions came rolling in. What happened between you two? Is it true you're splitting up? I didn't give them any details. I wasn't about to tell them about Ginger's obsession with designer babies. Let her deal with that embarrassment herself. Ginger, on the other hand, didn't handle the social fallout as smoothly as she probably expected. I heard through mutual friends that people were subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, criticizing her. One guy joked, "Well, now you're free to find that Viking you've been dreaming about." I met Ginger 2 months after my divorce, and I was really shocked when I noticed that she had a noticeable baby bump, like she was pregnant. I was completely taken aback, honestly, because I knew for sure that it wasn't early stages of pregnancy. So, I was left thinking that she must have gotten pregnant while still married. My mind was racing trying to process it all, but one thing was clear. No matter what, I couldn't just walk away from my own child. I wasn't going to abandon my responsibility as a father. So, I asked Ginger if she'd like to sit down in a cafe and have a serious conversation. Once we were sitting down, I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Listen, I'm going to support you financially, and I'll be there for our child, no matter what. I want to be involved in their life and help raise them." At that moment, it felt like everything was turning upside down, but I knew I had to do the right thing for my kid. It wasn't going to be easy, and things were complicated, but I had to step up. But then, Ginger shocked me with something I never saw coming. With a deep sigh, she looked at me, almost as if she was preparing herself to say something she'd been hiding for a long time. "The baby," she started, "it's not yours." I froze, not sure how to respond. "What do you mean it's not mine?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. She took a deep breath and continued, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and fear. I cheated on you while we were still married. I met someone on a dating app, a tall, handsome guy with blonde hair and blue eyes. I was drawn to him because of his looks. We only had a few meetings, and it wasn't serious for him, but I ended up getting pregnant. I sat there, trying to make sense of it all. "You had an affair? And now you're telling me the baby is his?" Ginger nodded slowly. "Yes." I didn't know what to do. I panicked when I found out I was pregnant. I realized that the baby might have light hair and blue eyes, just like him. And that's when I started to worry you'd immediately know that the baby wasn't yours. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I processed her words. "So, you made up this whole story about wanting a child with a Scandinavian-looking man just to cover up your mistake?" Her face flushed with shame. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I told you that I wanted a child with someone who had that kind of look, but the truth is, it was just to cover up what I had done. I didn't know how to face you with the truth. I was scared of losing you and scared of what you might think." I took a long pause, the weight of her confession settling in. "So, all of this was a lie? You made up a whole story just to hide the fact that you had an affair?" She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it was wrong. I should have told you from the beginning, but I was afraid. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to respond." Everything had turned upside down in a matter of minutes. A year later, I happened to run into Ginger completely by chance. It was in a supermarket, Trader Joe's. She was walking through the aisles with a stroller, and as soon as I saw her, I couldn't believe it. I greeted her, and she looked up with a small but genuine smile. She was still attractive, but there was something in her eyes, a tiredness, a certain sadness that wasn't there before. Ginger greeted me back warmly. I bent down toward the stroller to get a closer look at her daughter, curious to see how she had grown. And when I saw her, I couldn't help but smile. The little girl was absolutely beautiful, with big brown eyes and dark hair. It was clear that she was stunning, and she had this innocence about her that made her even more charming. But what struck me most was how much she looked like her mother. There was no denying it. The girl was a perfect copy of Ginger, a beautiful little version of her. She didn't resemble the Scandinavian man, her biological father, at all. The child had none of his features, no light eyes or blonde hair. She was, without a doubt, a mini version of Ginger. In the end, it's not the looks that matter most for a child. What really matters is that they grow up surrounded by love, guidance, and stability, where they have both a mom and a dad who are there for them through everything. Ginger got so caught up in the idea of finding the perfect genes for her child, but in doing so, she lost someone who could have been an amazing father. I may not have looked like a model or had the perfect genetic traits she dreamed of, but I was the kind of man who could have been the best dad in the world to our kids. Someone who would have loved them unconditionally, protected them, and been there through every step of their lives. The truth is, I couldn't be with someone who didn't see me as the father of our children. Her betrayal, that choice to pursue another path, was something I could never forgive. The divorce was inevitable. Sometimes we lose sight of what really matters, and in the end, it's not the perfect genes we need. It's the love of a good, devoted parent. Someone who's there for the long haul, no matter what.